Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Hello, everybody. My name is John Hamre. I'm the president at CSIS, and I'm delighted to welcome you to a real special opportunity for us, and that is a conversation with Congressman Meeks, who is one of the great leaders of foreign policy matters in the House of Representatives, and it's a real privilege because he also brings a passion for updating American policy when it comes to Africa. Now, my colleague, Judd Devermont, who is the Director of the Africa Program, he's going to lead the conversation today with Congressman Meeks. But I did want to just say a word, at the beginning. I've been here at CSIS for 20 years and worked in government for 30 years. We have obsolete ideas about Africa in this country. They tend to either be gauzy, nostalgic, out of Africa movie type things, or they tend to be dark and, terrible things like blood diamonds. We don't have a modern, sophisticated understanding of Africa. It's becoming a dynamic, youthful, urban, educated, highly networked continent. And it is changing and we don't understand it. So the purpose of our meeting today with Congressman Meeks is to gain his insights because he has been leading on this. And it's for us collectively to start thinking, what do we need to do to start having a modern understanding of America's interests and our foreign policy goals with Africa? So, Judd, let me turn it to you. Would you please introduce Congressman Meeks and then take us into this very interesting conversation?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Hamre. And let me just echo your welcome to Congressman Meeks. I think that we are incredibly fortunate to have him here today to share his vision for what an inclusive and strategic foreign policy towards Africa look like. I want to just add that it is my view, as yours, Dr. Hamre, that we're at an inflection point here. Africa is experiencing rapid change, while the world is entering this period of prolonged strategic drift and uncertainty. And so in my mind, that's a clear call for a rethink. And it's incumbent on all of us to think about how we do this differently. How do we develop a new blueprint for US engagement with both African governments and African publics? And we couldn't be more honored to have Congressman Meeks here to do this with us. So Congressman Gregory Meeks is a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He was the ranking member of the Europe and Eurasia Subcommittee, serves as the co-chair of the EU, Colombia, and Brazil caucuses, as the vice chair of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee. And he's a big promoter of bringing attention and investment to Africa over his 11 terms in office. So we're going to turn to Congressman Meeks for a couple of open remarks, and then we'll get into a Q&A. Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you, Judd. And thank you, John, also, and all the folks at CSIS for the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you today. As I think about what America's role in the world and where Africa fits into the larger foreign policy puzzle, conversation with you and the experts like yourselves are incredibly helpful. And I hope, should I be successful being the next chair, that we continue to work in the manner that we have. And I will be relying upon those expertise and those experts like Judd to help us as we move forward. You may have guessed that I hope to see a change in America's relationship to the world, and specifically to Africa, a continent that this president has found not time to visit, not time to, but he has found a lot of time actually to disparage, not time to visit or entertain any of the African leaders that have come to visit us in the United States. And so they said, as the possible next chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, it would be an honor for me to shepherd that change next year along with a Biden-Harris administration. Although this next comment is not Africa specific, I think it's necessary and a very important first step. I believe we have to revitalize and revamp our State Department. Our diplomatic corps has been gutted and treated with suspicion, leading to incredibly low morale and early departures. This fact, combined with not putting diplomacy or our expertise first, hurts us at home and abroad. The unsung heroes on the front lines across the globe quietly ensure peace, promote good economic and cultural ties, and serve Americans abroad. In addition to giving them the respect they deserve, I will work to make the State Department look more like America, making sure we stick to our values at home as well as we espouse them abroad. And I think that having the kind of diversity in the State Department also will help us with individuals who will understand and visit the continent of Africa. So how should we engage Africa with a renewed focus on diplomacy? Now, many of you may know that I'm a multilateralist. In our quickly changing world, ideas, finance, goods, and people are more interconnected than ever. Furthermore, the collective challenges we see today, whether it's climate change, diseases, etc., can only be tackled in coordination with others. The African Union, the AU, is a prime example of what should be a source of African solutions, with support from the US and our missions in Addis Ababa. And although I think there is plenty of untapped potential in foreign diplomatic ties between states at the multilateral level, I'm also a big believer in informal diplomacy. Our business community is huge and should play a big role in it, in trade and other aspects. The diaspora, cultural leaders, civil society, all need to be tapped for ideas and energy, just as it is with CSIS. Over my last 20 years in Congress, I've been a constant promoter of doing business with Africa. For example, in following the trajectory of the African Continental Free Trade Area, I see it as a possible avenue for growth, one that American companies should know about, perhaps in cooperation with the Development Finance Corporation. But Africa is not an economic monolith, and our work in this space should be nuanced and tailored, taking advantage of companies and experts, and frankly, other members of Congress, like my friend and chair of the Africa Subcommittee, Karen Bass, who have been committed over decades to Africa. And I also would bring out, I would be remiss if I did not talk about my initial induction into the Foreign Affairs Committee and the hard work of my, one of my idols actually, of the late Congressman Donald Payne Sr., who I traveled with extensively to various countries on the continent, also knowing and learning how to do unconventional things so that we can make sure that we have a better opportunity to participate and to cooperate. Alongside economic cooperation must be a commitment to human rights and good governance. In the effort to stabilize regions at any cost, we are tempted to lose sight of the root causes of instability. Yes, the West, broadly speaking, is sometimes guilty here. The United States is sometimes guilty here. But if we in Congress, and hopefully with a new administration, use our mouthpieces to speak out to our counterparts against human rights abuses in places like Uganda, and lend a hand in anti-corruption efforts in places like South Africa, and encourage fair and peaceful elections in Cote d'Ivoire, for example, we can be a force for good in the long run. We're not the only actors engaged in Africa, and I bristle at limiting the conversation to the continent even. Our engagement in Africa affects our relationships with Europe in many areas. Look at climate change, for example, and migration. Our engagement in Africa affects our Middle East policy as well. Egypt and the Sudan come to mind. None of these decisions can be made and condoned off from one another. Allow me to fully mention a topic that comes up with every conversation. I mean, every conversation on US foreign policy, sooner or later, and that's China. I don't think it should be shaped or shade our engagement with the continent. We must use the full array of our diplomatic and military know-how to secure the success of our relationship, not because of China's efforts, but because an African continent that is peaceful, prosperous, and democratic will be better for its citizens and a better ally and a partner for the United States. So I look forward to going into more specifics in the conversation and bringing the fruits of our conversations to the committee as soon. And I look forward to hearing you. You know, oftentimes when if I'm the chair, you'll be testifying before our committee very often. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, sir. And I look forward to the opportunity to testify. I want to start with a question that in my 20 years of working in Africa, I still get almost every day, not as much as the China question perhaps, but second to the China question, which is, why does Africa matter? And what I've been telling people is there's a Beltway argument, a national security interest argument, but then there's the argument that when you go back to your district, when you're in Queens, that you make. And I'd like to hear both of those arguments from you.
So there's, two ways that I answer that question, because for me, I think that to a degree, I am uniquely positioned. So there's a Beltway argument, and there's an argument, as you correctly stated, that I utilize at home with my constituents, because many of the African diaspora are my constituents. And so they have they have many of their family members, et cetera, that are still on the continent, and they're looking for a better way on the continent and to utilize their potential and their skill. But also, we got to make sure that when you look at the potential of Africa, the demographics, the economic potential, the rich energy and the urbanization of all, those are all enormous reasons why we need to be excited about Africa. And we've got to also be concerned, as we know, we were able to deal with the health crisis when Ebola hit the continent. And now when you talk about the COVID-19, we've got to make sure there, because if there's instability and dealing with some of the climate change issues and other, if African countries have a looming debt issues and that they can't afford, then some of that comes back home against us also. So we need to make sure that we're working closely there. And then if you look on top of that at the power that Africa, the continent, will be able to play at the UN and other places, that is something else that's for strategically interest for us that we should be focused on. You look at the population growth that is taking place in Africa. I think the continent will have close to 2 billion people soon, most of them young. So to get them involved in the economy and stabilize the government will also benefit us. As I said earlier, the world is much smaller than it used to be. So it's important that we make sure that this continent is on our front burner, not our back burner.
I think that's exactly right. What I've been saying lately is the future is African. And what that means is, because of the population boom that you talked about, sir, that whatever problem that we want to achieve globally, it's going to have an African element to it. Climate change, issues around privacy, the restoration of multilateralism, as you talked about. And the more that we think about Africa as part of that global community, I think the more that we'll be able to elevate it, and at the committee, in the executive branch, but I think back in hometowns as well. You mentioned in your opening remarks about President Trump's record. You talked about the fact that he hasn't hosted many African leaders in the Oval Office. In fact, starting with Kennedy, no president has had less Africans in the Oval Office in his first term, has not made a trip to the continent. We could go on about the disparaging comments that he has made, but I want to focus our conversation on the implications. What does it mean for our interests when we are not as robustly engaged on the continent? Who's taking advantage of our absence? And what do we do about it?
Clearly, China, you see them having more influence on the continent. Russia, they now have space for them in Central African Republic, for example. Then you also have places like North Korea, who's trying to get in there. So that gap us not being at the table, us being absent, has given a lot of other folks who I don't believe have Africa in its best interest, because the way that they deal, we got to figure out. But we need to be at the table. We need to be sure that we're there helping, support, and working with the African Union, for example, and make sure that there is training that's going on to help. Otherwise, we leave the door open for a number of other countries to get in and to deal and take advantage. So we have created over the last 4 years a huge vacuum. And as you said, I don't think that this president, other than disparaging words, have any interest really in the continent. And we've got to learn that the rhetoric, especially as it comes from the president of the United States, it matters. Soft power matters. So we've got to be very mindful of that. And that's why I'm very much hoping that come January 20th, I'll be working with a new administration who will have individuals who are really focused on the continent, and we can work together to try to make sure that we have a relationship. That being said, I understand. I'm not saying that, at this point, we need to figure out ways with others that might be on the continent, how to work together in that regard. But I want to make sure there's capacity building. It's something that's significant and important for us, so that Africa can become and stand on its own. If someone else is coming to build and they're bringing all the workforce with them, and that increasing the capacity of the folks on the continent, especially when we talk about the youth that's there, then we are again missing the boat. So there's a lot that we can do just by being at the table.
I think you're exactly right. There's sometimes a refrain in the Beltway that we want to be Africa's partner of choice, but most African countries want a choice of partners. And I think what is at our advantage is to give them the tools to make the assessments about their partners. I'm positive we're going to come out looking pretty good. And I think that our adversaries aren't. But when we play this zero-sum game, which is what this administration has done, I think it really, we know a number of African leaders have said that they have been displeased by that approach. So you said in your opening remarks that trade, and you have a great legacy and record on trade, is such a huge part of what we do in Africa. And you know that U.S. trade with Africa has been, 2%, under 2% for the last couple of years. So there's a number of different ways that we could hopefully change that dynamic, right? Get more trade in. And I would ask you for your thoughts on a couple of things. So one, AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. There's a bipartisan consensus that it needs to be graduated, right? That we can do better, but questions about how. And then as you mentioned, this really exciting moment with the CFTA, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, that will create the largest trading bloc since the WTO, that will be nominally bigger than India's GDP. And how do we get ourselves in a position to help the Africans not only develop the CFTA in a way that is going to be good for their economies, but it's going to be good for our economies? How do you think about that?
Well, you know what? I think that that's extremely, extremely important, and we can do it. And that's how engaging in what we're talking about is absolutely important. Number one, by being at the table, what you said is absolutely right. We can advise individuals on the best way and the best practices. Let them decide then for themselves who they want to work with. But when you talk about the best practices and the best way to even negotiate with us or others, there's negotiating skills that are really important. Some of these countries have been taken advantage of, not just because they don't know how to negotiate. And so getting involved in that regard is important. And then also what happens then with the continent, it causes a lot of intercontinental trade. So if they're trading among themselves, then it even becomes a bigger, I think, opportunity for us to have some of our corporations and others also doing business there, which helps their economies. It helps make sure that they graduate into the 21st century global economy, and it makes all the difference in the world. And so AGOA was good for its time. And people forget that now AGOA is almost over 20 years old. things have changed subsequent to there, so we've got to go to the next step. And we've got to make sure that we are talking about a complete and full trade agreement on various issues and various substances that I think that would be important to the improvement and to the economic sustainability of the continent, as well as what happens as a regard of that, then the institutions within the various governments, which is again where we can help, they become stronger. And they're able to then look at what we do, I think, which would be important, and how we make sure the standards that we have and the rules and the regulations so that people are not taking advantage of the system is tremendously important. So, and I'll say this also, and one of the reasons why I'm a strong supporter of trade, I always say generally, especially, now with us, but intercontinental also, there's two, really major oldest forms of relationships that countries have. One is trade. The other is they fight a war with one another. And I think trade is much better than fighting and war and things of that nature. Let's be more interdependent upon each other, taking advantage of the various regions that we have so that we can make sure that that there's a better tomorrow. That's why I think one of the avenues there is strong support of the AU. When you look at the dam situation, for example, in Ethiopia, that now threatens that region, et cetera, there's a way that we can look at, there's going to be dams and other opportunities to expand for power, et cetera. But we should look at it on a regional basis, and that makes a difference also, in my estimation.
Well, and I want to get back to talk about the dam a little bit later in our conversation, but just a wonky question for you, which is around this administration has initiated a free trade agreement with Kenya. And there's lots of people who think that's a very good idea. I happen to be one of them. But we have some challenges here where the Africans are worried about this undercutting the CFTA. Do you think that there are ways that we can pursue these FTAs without losing the promise of the CFTA? How would you think about that?
Yeah, as I said, I'm a multilateralist, and I like the CFTA much better than bilateral deals. I think that maybe as an expression of showing that there's an interest on the continent, and the fact, you reward some of the countries that have good governance and moving forward. So as an initial step, I probably agree with you that it's a good thing to do, but I think that we've got to make sure that we don't utilize that as how we completely engage on the continent, because then I think that we lose out in the long run. It is the multilateral relationships through the CFTA that's really, really important, and that I think that ultimately brings the whole continent together, as opposed to just individual nations or the 56 that's on the continent.
Yeah, I think that's the big game. When I talk to corporations, U.S. corporations and firms, what they're really excited about is how the CFTA will unlock these economies. They're excited about trade with Kenya or specific countries, but what the CFTA will do is going to be catalytic for the entire continent. So let's move to democracy and security issues. You mentioned in your opening that we haven't done enough to promote democracy in Africa. And right now in West Africa, we have several leaders going for third terms. We haven't heard much from the administration on that. And then there's this question around security. So we'll do it in two steps. Let me first ask you about what would you like to see us do if you were the chair? How would we have a more forceful position on democracy? And then we can talk about some of the security issues.
Well, I'll tell you, simply go in and look at, we got to do we got to practice what we preach ourselves, because my problem right now is when you talk about democracy, there's a direct threat to our democracy with this current president. So it'd be hard to have that conversation if he's the president and he's talking about not having the peaceful transfer of power, obeying the Constitution, undercutting the credibility of elections. That makes it difficult. But if you had a Joe Biden, we can then change that conversation and talk about how you create a government that is sustainable and why the democracy is important and how you progress at that and have more carrots when you do that as opposed to just the sticks that are often utilized. We'd have to, I think, be smarter in the way that we use sanctions. You know, oftentimes people think sanctions is the wherewithal to do everything, but you got to remember what happened with sanctions in South Africa was completely a different structure and a different time for a different result at that particular period of time. So it's not a one-all, be-all just to say that we're going to sanction someone or sanction a country as a result. We need to have as many carrots than sticks in figuring out how we work together in that regard. And I think that what you can show is, and here's where I believe that our utilization of our corporations as far as soft power and diplomacy is concerned. You know, I often use as an example, you know, you talk about this competition and you say we may come up with it again with China, for example. But I remember when I visited China, the Chinese wanted more than anything else to work for an American company. Why? Because they human rights was adhered to. The pay was better, safety was better, and so it led to a situation where it was closing down some of those factories that were violating human rights. And so we could do something similar on the continent and then reward those so that we can show that this is how you improve the lives of various people, everyday people on the continent. It helps with schooling, etc. We started also under the Obama administration with electrifying Africa, which is tremendously important. And I think that shows how you make a difference. And we've got to be at the table involved in infrastructure development on the continent also, because that's what is largely missing.
There's probably more debate about our security cooperation than anything else, probably on both sides of the aisle, right? President Trump is talking about reducing our troops levels in Africa, moving AFRICOM from Germany. And then I think, you know, there are Democrats and others who question the way that we're approaching our security assistance, that it's too over-militarized, or there's not enough of a consideration of human rights. There's questions obviously about the AUMF. What do you think is the right balance here between security assistance and cooperation, but staying consistent with our values and working towards outcomes that we all agree on are important?
Well, you know what? I think that African nations are learning more and more that you've got to go in there and be an honest broker. So if you come in there just with the military and just concerned about ourselves and showing no self-respect or doing anything in regards to engaging with them and the people on the continent, then they become disenchanted with that. And we've got to do, you know, keeping our military or only going into places that are specifically for our military strategic advantage, without talking about how we do the other aspects of helping Africa grow and the economy and how it helps them. You know, that's where the balance is. The balance is to try to make sure that we're looking at the future of the continent also, that we care about where it goes so that it is a part of this global world that we live in. And that's another country, you know, when you think about it, Africa has been victimized in the shape that it has been in, or it is in, as a result of colonization. So we don't want it to appear, and we should not, and we should be firmly and clear about it. We're not going in there in the same methodology or in the methods that we did when colonization took place, just for our own strategic advantage, and the rest, forget about it. And that's why there's got to be a heavy focus, if I am the chair of the committee, on what our relationship is and what we're looking to obtain and how we're thinking differently than we had in the past about our relationships with the continent. And I think when you do that, when you stabilize governments and you make them strong, then that helps them fight with the insurgencies and others. When we're concerned about terrorism and other areas, that helps stabilize them so that they can do and fight for themselves, because they don't want their democracies destroyed. So that's where the balance is. And I don't think that we've had that balance. As I said earlier, I think that not only have we not had the balance for the last 4 years, we haven't been visible at all, other than something that we think is in our strategic interest in small little areas that has nothing to do really with the help and the wherewithal and to help the conflict itself.
Sir, are you okay with a little rapid fire questions and go through some of the hot spots with me?
Let's go.
All right, so let's talk about Sudan. SST. The State Department has now, Pompeo has said that he would like to see the state sponsor of terrorism designation lifted. Of course, now there's this whole challenges around Israel that's almost hijacked this process. What is your view on the right approach for Sudan's transition in our national interests?
Well, the challenges in Sudan, I think that what we have to do is to pave a way for a comprehensive solution to the security crisis that is there. And I think that, again, that a successful path is not bilateral. I think here's where we need to be able to utilize a number of our own allies, be European and others, and come up with a comprehensive plan working collectively together to make that happen. And that will then help promote the strength and peace and security in the Sudan itself. That's my viewpoint there. I'm trying to shorten my answer. I know
no, that's okay, but let me just push you on this question. I mean, do you think that they should remain under the state sponsor of terrorism designation?
No, I think that as we progress, no. I think that we've got to make sure, sorry, I didn't answer that problem. No, I think that we need to work with them and we can make sure that we are helping secure that area and not preventing them from moving and making progress. So we need to move that, get away from that kind of a tag, because that will forever keep them down and prevent them from doing what they need to do. So I'm sorry, I didn't even pick that up with your question. But no,
that's okay. I just wanted to get you on in the conversation
Absolutely.
with that. So the other one, you mentioned it earlier, the dam. The United States has been involved in mediating between Ethiopia and Egypt over the Grand Renaissance Dam. Those talks broke down, and recently the administration has pulled $130 million from Ethiopia in the midst of its very fragile transition. What is the right approach in your mind to address an existential challenge for both Egypt and Ethiopia?
I think that we need to play a hand in being a fair broker to make sure that both sides, talk about the dam, the Nile River is huge, it's long, and it affects a lot of different countries around it that depend upon it. And for one country to control the dam, irrespective of the others, does not make sense to me. So we should get in and work primarily, and I think the AU again, we should help strengthen the AU and have the AU at the table working with both of the countries to try to come up with a formula that will work with this dam, because this is the first, I think, of many other dams that may be constructed. And anytime you have damming, it controls the waters back and forth of an adjoining nation. And so looking at it and working collectively together for the benefit of the whole as opposed to one nation. And I think that the AU, again, plays an important and tremendous role in getting that done. And I think that we should be at the table working with them and strengthening them and whatever we can with our advice on how to negotiate and to work this issue through. It's a way, I believe the AU can play a tremendous role here, and we need to make sure that we're supporting them in that regard.
Congressman Meeks, let me ask you one more question for today, and thank you for being so generous with your time. The Hill, but particularly the CBC, has such a proud record of engagement on the continent. You mentioned earlier in your remarks about the role that you played in fighting apartheid. And I think that the Hill, and particularly the CBC, has been so important on raising diaspora voices. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about the role of the CBC and the Hill on Africa policy, and in particular, this challenge right now around connecting the dots between racism at home and what that means abroad, and how do we get at that?
Oh, that's a great question, Judd. It really is, because there is a direct connection as to what's happening domestically at home in regards to race and what's taking place on the continent of Africa. where you see even some folks that are now, migrating from Africa because of, some of the injustices that are surviving there, that presents themselves there. So what we have to make sure all over the world, and that's why I think Black Lives Matter and the Congressional Black Caucus and our positions in talking about the disparities that happens in communities of color, that we've got to right those wrongs. When we talk about historically what has taken place and understand what they've done and what they've meant to this society at home. Well, so true with colonization on the continent of Africa and how that system in and of itself, because sometimes people forget, it's for many of the countries on the continent, they just became independent countries 50 years ago, which is no time in the time of history. And so therefore there's a lot that has to be done in that regard. A lot that I think that some of the former colonizers should be focused on and try to make sure that some of the injustices that took place in the past was now looked at, and there are things that has to be done, whether it's reparations or other things, to result of them being put in the position economically and otherwise that they're currently in. Is no fault of their own by and large. So we've got to make sure in the Congressional Black Caucus that we're joining hands and understanding that we are working with other legislative bodies on what we're doing to focus on having disparities eliminated in any number of ways, and work with them in a collective way. Whether it's the diaspora, particularly on the continent, but whether it's the same thing in Europe, it's the same thing in Central and South America. So all of those things are in common. And so I think on a collective basis, we can get things done in that regard because it will help one another and strengthen us all over the continent. Let me just say this also, that it is extremely important that there is this meeting and dialogue. When I think about the Congressional Black Caucus, many of us, for example, myself, went back to have DNA checks so that I know where I came from. Found I'm from the Mende tribes of Sierra Leone, which is significant. And so whatever I can do there, and other members of the CBCs doing that. And I have to say, if I'm the chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, it will be the focus on Africa, and those from the African diaspora will be very much on the front burner, as it is in the United States right now. It's the appropriate time in history to make sure that we are addressing these issues in America and all over this planet. And the Congressional Black Caucus is in a perfect position to lead this challenge.
I don't think there's a better way to end our conversation, sir. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your vision, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, likewise. Thank you very much.